When Russia invaded Ukraine back in February 2022, Western leaders hit back with huge sanctions. And pretty much everyone expected the Kremlin's economy to just collapse. But here we are, 2 years later, and that collapse just never happened. In fact, if you just look at the surface, Russia's economy seems to be booming, while Europe's has been kind of a mess.
So, what is really going on? Is the Russian economy actually red hot, or is it just bleeding out in the red? That's what we're going to dig into today. We're going to peel back the layers on Putin's economic facade and see what's really underneath. And I mean, just look at these numbers. They tell a really startling story. Between 2022 and 2024, Russia's GDP shot up by 3.6%. The Eurozone, it only managed to grow by 0.5%. So yeah, you heard that right. Russia's economy, the one that was supposed to be crippled by sanctions, grew almost 7 times faster than Europe's. And that's the big puzzle we need to solve here.
All right, to really get what's happening now, we've got to go back in time a bit and look at what Russia's modern economy was actually built on. It's really a story of total collapse, then a huge recovery, all built on a massive reliance on natural resources. You know, after the Soviet Union fell, the 1990s were just a brutal time for Russia. This policy called shock therapy was supposed to rapidly fix things, but it was a complete disaster, with GDP shrinking by a mind-boggling 50%. Then Vladimir Putin steps onto the scene in 1999, and his timing, well, it couldn't have been better. Global oil prices were surging, and that fueled a massive economic recovery. And crucially, this is when Russia got really entangled with Europe's energy supply, basically becoming its main gas station.
So here's the crucial point. Russia's massive wealth from natural resources, we're talking oil and gas, became the absolute bedrock of its whole economy. I mean, before the invasion, natural resources made up 1/5 of the GDP, 1/3 of the government's entire budget, and a full half of everything they exported. And all that money wasn't just propping up the economy, it was directly funding Russia's military ambitions.
Which brings us to that unexpected boom. Because even with all the sanctions, cutting off those energy lifelines turned out to be, well, incredibly difficult. And that's how Russia managed to defy all those predictions of a quick economic collapse after 2022.
And this slide just perfectly lays out the dilemma Europe was facing. In 2024, even with sanctions, the EU was still buying almost 22 billion euros worth of fossil fuels from Russia. Now, compare that to the 8.7 billion euros in aid it sent to Ukraine in the same year. Turns out, Putin had made a good bet. Europe's need for Russian energy was just stronger than its outrage over the invasion. So, from the outside, the world saw this surprisingly strong Russian economy. And at home, Putin was totally winning the narrative, showing a country that was strong in the face of a hostile world. But was it real? Well, as you can probably guess, those rosy numbers, they don't tell the whole story.
And that brings us to the real engine behind Russia's growth. It's not some healthy, diverse economy humming along. Nope. It's an economy that has been completely shifted onto a war footing. Okay, so to keep this long war going, Putin had to take some pretty extraordinary measures. The government just started pumping insane amounts of cash into the economy, and Russia's military-industrial complex just roared back to life. Military spending exploded, jumping by a massive 64% in just the first year of the war, and it's only gone up from there. And it wasn't just money for tanks and bullets. We're talking total government spending. It's up by more than 50% since the war started. That is just a fire hose of public money, and it's all aimed at one thing, sustaining the war. And to speed all this up, the government basically told its state-run banks, you're going to lend money to defense companies, and you're going to give them good deals. The result? Corporate debt has just ballooned by 71% since mid-2022, as factories went into overdrive, cranking out everything from bullets and shells to tank parts. So what you end up with is an economy that's basically on, well, what the source material for this explainer calls war-induced steroids. This boom isn't coming from healthy, sustainable growth. It's being artificially pumped up by massive debt-fueled government spending on the military. And just like with steroids, this kind of artificial growth, it comes with some really nasty side effects.
And now we're starting to see the cracks in that facade. The hidden costs of this wartime boom are starting to bubble to the surface, and they are pretty high.
So, side effect number 1? Runaway inflation. By 2024, inflation was hitting 9.5%.
You've got factories and the military all fighting over the same pool of workers, so they have to pay them more. Then businesses have to raise their prices to cover those higher wages. And then, of course, workers need another raise to afford the higher prices. It's a classic spiral. The economy was just overheating.
So Russia's central bank had to do something drastic. They jacked up interest rates all the way to 22% to try and get a handle on this inflation. Now, just to put that in perspective for you, the interest rate for the European Central Bank is 2%. In China, it's around 3.5. So 22% is just astronomical. It helped prop up the currency, but those sky-high rates have also slammed the brakes on the rest of the economy.
And what you end up with is really a tale of two different economies. On one side, you've got the military sector. It's flooded with cash, it's getting those cheap loans, production is through the roof. And then there's the other side, the civilian sector. It's being starved of workers and money, and it's basically buckling under the pressure of not enough workers, falling production, and those absolutely crushing interest rates.
And look, this isn't just a theory. The data backs it up. According to the Bank of Finland, between 2021 and 2024, Russian production of things like cars and household appliances, it dropped by around 30%. Both of them. It's pretty clear. Russia is throwing every person and every penny it has at the war, and the regular economy is being put on ice.
And all of this brings us to the Kremlin's biggest weakness, its most critical vulnerability. Because this whole operation, all the spending, the entire war machine, it all depends on one thing. And kind of ironically, Russia's own money machine is now at risk of, well, running out of gas.
Yeah, that money from oil and gas is still the absolute lifeline for the Kremlin. It makes up 30% of the entire federal budget. So as long as the oil and gas are flowing and the prices stay high, they can keep this whole thing going. But what happens if they don't?
And that's the big problem, right? The government's entire budget is built on a guess, a forecast of what oil and gas prices will be. This year, their math was based on their main type of crude oil selling for about $70 a barrel. But what if global prices slump to, say, $55? Well, their budget deficit would more than double, just like that.
Now, to plug these budget holes, Russia has a rainy day fund. It's called the National Wealth Fund. The problem is they've been draining it fast. The part of the fund they can actually spend easily has dropped to just over $36 billion. That's the lowest it's been since 2019. That safety net is getting smaller and smaller.
In fact, some economists are now predicting that if things keep going like this, the spendable part of that fund could be completely gone by next year. And that would leave Russia with no way to cover its debts. This is where the numbers on a spreadsheet suddenly become a huge political problem. See, Putin's entire grip on power has been built on a promise of stability and a better life for ordinary Russians. A long, painful economic slowdown could shake the very foundation of his rule.
Look, in the short term, Moscow probably has the money to keep going. But in the long term, Russia is facing a pretty grim future. That economic growth we saw, it was real, but it was also completely artificial, and it's not sustainable. And now, as the source material for this whole explainer puts it, that facade is finally starting to crumble.